Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, fellow citizens of the world, there comes a time in the life of every nation when it must rise beyond politics, beyond division, and beyond the noise of extremists to face the truth with courage and resolve. Today we gather not to judge, not to accuse, but to understand, to examine a question that touches not just two nations, India and Canada, but also the soul of democracy, the dignity of dialogue, and the pursuit of peace. The question before us is simple, yet profound. Can Canada fix the Khalistani problem, and how did the G7 become a turning point in the resetting of relations between two great democracies? In my own life, I've seen what happens when division is allowed to grow unchecked, and I have witnessed the miracle that is possible when reconciliation becomes the path. Let us walk this path together with open hearts, fearless minds, and the belief that nations can rise above their past to create a future based not on suspicion, but on solidarity. Canada is widely recognized as a beacon of democratic values, multicultural harmony, and inclusive governance. It has built a reputation over decades as a nation that welcomes diversity and safeguards the rights of its citizens, regardless of race, religion, or ideology. This open democratic framework has earned global respect, but also, in some instances, has been exploited by fringe elements who use these freedoms not to build bridges, but to promote division. Among these groups, some proponents of the Khalistani separatist movement have found space to operate under the guise of freedom of expression, advocacy, or cultural preservation. While democratic systems must protect dissent and dialogue, there is a fine line between peaceful activism and rhetoric that incites hatred or advocates for the breakup of another sovereign nation. The challenge arises when extremist ideologies are allowed to grow unchecked within this free environment, influencing public discourse, manipulating media narratives, and even infiltrating political conversations. The misuse of Canada's tolerant and pluralistic platform by some radical voices has not only caused concern in India, but also within sections of the Canadian population who worry about the impact on community harmony and national integrity. What begins as an expression of opinion can evolve into propaganda, and what masquerades as cultural pride can turn into separatist extremism. Canada faces the difficult task of distinguishing between legitimate advocacy and dangerous extremism without compromising its foundational democratic values. The Khalistani issue has put Canada at a crossroads. On one hand, it must continue to protect the civil liberties of all communities, including the Sikh diaspora. On the other hand, it must be vigilant against groups that weaponize these freedoms to sow discord, glorify violence, or threaten international peace. Ignoring the long-term implications of such activities risks damaging bilateral ties with India, a key partner in trade, education, defense, and technology, and undermines Canada's moral credibility on the global stage. The task is not to silence voices, but to ensure that those voices contribute to peace, unity, and responsible dialogue. Balancing liberty with security is not easy, but it is essential to maintaining the integrity of any democratic society. The Khalistani separatist movement, though rooted in historical grievances from the 1980s, has experienced a troubling resurgence in recent years, particularly among segments of the Sikh diaspora living abroad. While the vast majority of Sikhs worldwide are peaceful, patriotic, and contribute positively to their societies, a small fringe continues to promote the idea of a separate Sikh homeland called Khalistan, carved out from Indian territory. This movement, while largely dormant within India, has found new life in countries like Canada, the UK, and the United States, where freedom of speech and political expression allows space for such ideologies to circulate. In Canada, this has taken the form of public rallies, protests, symbolic referendums, and even hate-driven rhetoric targeting Indian institutions and figures. The movement's influence is not merely ideological, it has material and organizational support from individuals and networks that remain committed to keeping the Khalistan issue alive. The use of social media, community events, and even local politics to subtler, or sometimes overtly advance separatist narratives shows a deliberate attempt to create legitimacy for a cause that has long lost momentum in its homeland. This revival is not about preserving culture or identity. It is often tied to political agendas, anti-India sentiment, and in some cases, glorification of violent figures from a painful chapter of Indian history. These actions not only distort the truth, but also put diaspora communities at risk of division, misinformation, and radicalization. The emotional appeal of Khalistan, particularly for younger generations growing up far from Punjab, is often built on incomplete or manipulated historical narratives. Many are introduced to the issue through a lens of victimhood and injustice without full awareness of complexities of the past or the progress made since. This selective memory creates a dangerous vacuum where resentment can flourish and extremism can be justified. In Canada, where the Sikh community is influential and deeply woven into the social fabric, such polarizing ideologies create a tension between integration and identity politics. When symbols of extremism are normalized in community events or when radical voices receive political attention, it sends a troubling message about what is tolerated in the name of multiculturalism. The rise of Khalistani influence also strains Canada's international relationships, especially with India, which views the movement not only as a threat to its sovereignty, but also as a painful reminder of decades of conflict and loss. By allowing space for these voices to grow unchecked, Canada unintentionally becomes a platform for narratives that undermine Indian unity and democratic institutions. The core issue is not the right to express political beliefs, but the endorsement or normalization of separatism, hate, and, in some cases, historical violence. The Canadian government and civil society face a critical challenge to draw a clear line between healthy political discourse and toxic, divisive extremism masquerading as activism. India has consistently voiced concern over the activities of Khalistani sympathizers operating from foreign soil, particularly in countries like Canada. These concerns are not rooted in paranoia, but in historical memory and ongoing security threats. The wounds from the insurgency period of the 1980s remain fresh for many Indians, especially those who lived through the violence, political assassinations, and communal unrest that marked that era. India's position has been clear. While it respects democratic freedoms globally, it cannot remain indifferent to activities that threaten its sovereignty or glorify those responsible for acts of terror within its borders. The resurgence of Khalistani rhetoric abroad is not just a symbolic insult. It is perceived as a real and ongoing security challenge. Over the years, Indian intelligence and security agencies have tracked individuals and groups overseas that continue to push the Khalistani agenda, sometimes with open admiration for figures involved in violent militancy. The presence of such individuals in events, their ability to organize referendums, and their connections to groups previously linked to terror activities is deeply concerning for New Delhi. India has repeatedly shared dossiers, intelligence inputs, and diplomatic communications with Canada, urging it to take stronger action against such elements. However, Canada's response has often been cautious, limited by its own legal frameworks and political considerations tied to diaspora dynamics. This cautious approach is seen by India as a lack of seriousness in addressing its core security concerns. The issue is further complicated by the perception in India that Canadian political leaders have at times been either silent or visibly accommodating toward these extremist voices, particularly during election seasons when diaspora votes become strategically important. This perceived political indulgence frustrates India as it undermines trust and raises questions about Canada's commitment to combating extremism in all its forms. India expects its partners to understand that freedom of expression cannot be a shield for those who promote separatism or glorify violence against the Indian state. From India's viewpoint, these actions are not internal matters of Canada, but global security issues that affect bilateral relations. India's diplomatic posture has therefore become increasingly firm, with public statements, official protests, and a clear call for accountability. The Indian government has also taken steps to restrict the influence of such groups within its own borders, whether through legal action, surveillance, or community outreach programs aimed at de-radicalization. However, it believes that unless countries like Canada take matching steps on their own soil, the problem cannot be effectively managed. India's growing global influence, economically, geopolitically, and technologically, means that its voice carries more weight than ever before. It is no longer willing to treat the Khalistani issue as a fringe matter. It is now central to its foreign policy priorities, especially with nations that claim to share its democratic and security values. At the heart of India's position is a simple yet powerful expectation that no country should provide safe haven or political legitimacy to those who aim to destabilize another sovereign nation. Cooperation on this issue is not only a matter of respecting India's internal security, but of honoring international norms around counterterrorism and peaceful coexistence. The recent G7 summit served as a crucial moment in reshaping the strained diplomatic relationship between India and Canada, which had been overshadowed by tensions surrounding the Khalistani issue. Prior to the summit, relations had cooled significantly due to public accusations, diplomatic expulsions, and a visible lack of coordination on key global matters. However, the presence of both leaders, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, at a shared multilateral platform created a necessary opening for dialogue, however brief or cautious it may have been. In the realm of international diplomacy, such multilateral settings often allow nations to reset the tone of engagement without the pressure or optics of formal bilateral meetings. The G7 provided that window. Although no official bilateral meeting was held between India and Canada during the summit, the very act of sharing the stage with other global leaders subtly changed the dynamic. It reminded both countries of their larger responsibilities, not just to each other, but to global stability, trade cooperation, and democratic unity. For Canada, it was a moment of reflection on how its internal challenges, such as extremist sympathies, can affect its credibility on the world stage. For India, it was a reminder that in an increasingly interconnected global order, measured diplomacy often yields more than confrontational rhetoric. Behind the scenes, quiet diplomacy may have begun, signals of intent, efforts to rebuild trust, and a mutual recognition that cooperation must outweigh conflict. The G7 also reinforced the idea that geopolitical alignment matters. As countries navigate global crises, from climate change and economic recovery to Indo-Pacific security and counter-terrorism, India and Canada are both needed at the table. Their friction over domestic extremist elements, while significant, cannot be allowed to derail broader cooperation. Leaders at the summit, especially those from Europe and the United States, are believed to have encouraged both sides to pursue reconciliation. Such encouragement from international peers often adds a level of diplomatic pressure and moral persuasion that is difficult to ignore. Canada, in particular, many have recognized that continued inaction on the Khalistan issue could isolate it from key allies and strategic partnerships. Moreover, the summit highlighted India's growing global stature, not just as a participant but as a leader on multiple global issues. With its strong voice on supply chain, resilience, digital governance, and peacekeeping, India demonstrated that it cannot be sidelined. Canada, being a fellow democracy and G7 member, cannot afford to let domestic political considerations jeopardize its relationship with one of the fastest growing economies and an emerging global power. There is also an economic incentive. Both countries share strong educational, technological, and trade ties. Resetting the diplomatic climate is not just a political necessity, it is a strategic imperative for long-term growth and global relevance. By the end of the summit, while no major breakthrough was announced, a softening of posture was evident. Both nations appeared more open to restoring dialogue and less interested in escalating tensions publicly. The G7, in that sense, functioned as a quiet mediator, reminding the two countries that shared values, strategic interests, and international responsibility must take precedence over domestic political friction. The real test lies ahead, whether this reset can translate into meaningful policy decisions, clear actions against extremism, and a sincere recommitment to mutual respect and cooperation. The Indian diaspora in Canada, particularly the Sikh community, plays a significant role in shaping the cultural, economic, and political landscape of the country. This community has contributed immensely to Canada's development and is widely respected for its work ethic, entrepreneurial spirit, and civic engagement. However, within this diverse group, there exists a small but vocal segment that continues to push separatist ideologies like the Khalistan movement. The influence of this group has grown disproportionately due to the misuse of community platforms, social media amplification, and sometimes even political appeasement. While their numbers are limited, their impact on Canada, India relations, and community cohesion has been considerable. This creates a complex situation where the broader diaspora's contributions are overshadowed by the radicalism of a few. The dual identity of diaspora, being both proudly Canadian and deeply connected to Indian root, offers a powerful opportunity to act as a bridge between the two nations. However, when radical elements within the diaspora exploit this connection to promote divisiveness or historical grievances, that bridge begins to crack. Community events that should celebrate heritage and unity are sometimes used to propagate separatist messages, glorify violent figures from India's insurgency era, or stoke anti-India sentiment. These actions not only deepen mistrust between India and Canada, but also polarize younger generations growing up in multicultural environments. They are forced to navigate confusing narratives that often pit cultural pride against national loyalty, leading to identity conflicts and, in some cases, susceptibility to radical views. Political involvement by diaspora leaders should ideally be a force for constructive engagement, advocacy, and representation. Unfortunately, in some cases, it has turned into a platform for pushing divisive agendas. When political candidates or elected officials in Canada appear at events where extremist symbolism is displayed, or when they remain silent in the face of provocative rhetoric, it raises legitimate concerns about the normalization of separatism. These actions may be intended to gain electoral support, but they often backfire by damaging Canada's diplomatic standing and by alienating the more moderate majority within the diaspora. There is a growing awareness among community leaders and youth that this trend must be reversed, and that true representation should be rooted in shared values of peace, respect, and coexistence. At the same time, the diaspora holds immense potential to serve as a force for reconciliation Mutual understanding. Many individuals and organizations within the community actively promote interfaith dialogue, Indo-Canadian cultural exchange, and youth education initiatives that focus on unity rather than division. These voices need greater amplification and support from both governments. Canada and India can work together to create programs that empower the diaspora to act as ambassadors of peace, not as carriers of historical conflict. Educational efforts, responsible media representation, and stronger civil society collaboration can help correct distorted narratives and foster a sense of global citizenship grounded in truth and mutual respect. The role of the diaspora should not be reduced to a geopolitical challenge. It must be viewed as a diplomatic asset that, when engaged responsibly, can repair damaged ties and create new opportunities for cooperation. Canada's diverse social fabric is one of its greatest strengths, and it must be protected from exploitation by those who do not represent the broader community's values. At the same time, India must continue to engage directly with the diaspora, acknowledging their contributions while clearly addressing concerns about extremism. This mutual engagement is essential to restoring trust and ensuring that the diaspora's legacy is one of unity, not division.